have a lesson this morning, and let me preface it a little bit before we begin. Sometimes I think people hear lessons and they wonder why. What would be the purpose? Well, let me kind of use this illustration. If you get ready to go to school, to kindergarten, one of the first things that you have to do is to make sure that your shots are all up to date, that you've been immunized against various diseases. When you get ready to go into some grades, there are some, again, checks for those shots. You're immunized for certain diseases. When you enlist in the United States military, then they give you a whole list of shots, and if you go overseas, you get another list of a whole series of immunizations. Well, why do you do that? Well, you do that because it gives you some protection against the diseases in question, so that hopefully you don't contract them and have a problem as a result of that. A lot of preaching is much the same. A lot of preaching is talking about things because we're so exposed to them. For example, we're about to have a new granddaughter. And in today's world, they won't even let you in the delivery area without having a whooping cough vaccine. You have to have that, and it has to be current. So we all had to go get one. Why? Because that puts someone else in your presence and might endanger. Most of us are aware that the world we live in is a pretty bad place. If you're not aware of that, then you have a really misguided idea of what's right and what's wrong. I mean, you take a look around you and see the things that exist around you. And some of the things have become so widely accepted that now it's so pervasive that if you listen to music, you watch a television program, you go to a movie, you listen to politicians discussing various issues, you listen to court decisions, you just listen to conversation, you observe the actions of people around you. There are a lot of things that are just really off the mark. Now, we can't discuss all of them, but we are going to discuss a few. Now, what we're entitling this lesson, it comes from Proverbs 23 and verse 23, a very famous verse, buy the truth and sell it not. Now, I use this for a reason. You know, when you sell the truth, for example, someone might say to you sometime, well, you know, why don't you just sell your car because it has certain value? And I say, well, the problem is I have to buy another one. So what am I going to replace it with? If you're going to sell something normally that you're using constantly, you've got to buy something to replace it. So when you bought the truth, and that's the standard, that's the standard that you live your life by, if you sell that truth for whatever price that you sell it for, you get nothing of value to replace it, because there is nothing of value to replace it. Now, we had a lesson last week, I believe, that was based on Esau and Jacob. We're not going to rehearse that. But what we are going to do is look at the one instance in their life that we studied at that particular time, because it illustrates this point very well. Jacob sawed pottage, which, from my understanding, that's kind of a stew or a soup or some dish that's cooked in a bowl somewhat like a casserole. And Esau came from the field, and he was faint. And Esau said to Jacob, feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage, for I am faint. Therefore was his name called Edom. And Jacob said, sell me this day thy birthright. Now think about what he said. Sell me this day thy birthright. And Esau said, behold, I am at the point to die, and what profit shall this birthright do to me? And Jacob said, swear to me this day. And he sware unto him, and he sold his birthright unto Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink, and rose up and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Now think about it. He sold his birthright for a bowl of soup. Now think about it for a moment. Isaac was a tremendously wealthy person. Tremendously wealthy. I don't know how wealthy he was, but he had inherited his father's wealth, and his father had been able to raise an army to go in pursuit of 3 kings who had kidnapped his nephew. So he must have been a wealthy guy. Extremely wealthy. Now, what this means is you have 2 sons here, and when Isaac died, the son who had the birthright was going to get a double portion. Well, let's just suppose for a moment that he was worth $1 million. And you divide that up, and he gets a double portion of that. He gets twice as much as his brother gets. Now, you think about that. I guess that would mean 66 and 33%, I guess, is the way to figure out. You think of the difference between $660,000 and $330,000, and you kind of understand what we're saying. You know, when you think about it, people today sell the truth constantly. What do they get in return? Well, what they get in return doesn't have any value. You know, Jesus warned us about something. And then what he warned us is the danger of not understanding the value of your soul. Not long ago, I wished I could remember the numbers, and I don't, and I apologize for that. But there was a gentleman who bought a painting or a document, I can't remember which, but it made all the news. He bought it at a yard sale. He paid, best I remember, less than $10 for it. Thing turned out to be worth, what was it, $5 million? I don't remember what the amount was, but it was tremendous. Now, the guy at home that had that garage sale, or whatever it was, when he saw that on the news, how do you think he felt? How would you feel if you had sold something that was worth millions of dollars for $2 or $3? You know, I have a small collection of stamps, and I'm not a stamp collector. They came to me in a weird way. Won't describe it. But anyway, I'm afraid to offer to sell them to anybody because I don't know what they're worth. I don't have any idea, so they just sit in my office in a little small black box. And until I figure out what they're worth, I've had them a long time, I'm not going to sell them because I don't know. I don't have any idea. A lot of people are that way about their soul. They don't know what it's worth. Jesus said, to help you to understand, what shall it profit a man if he gained the whole world? It would be interesting to know what the value of the whole world would be. Trillions and trillions of dollars. I don't know what it is, but it would be enormous. Your soul is worth more than that. What shall a man give in exchange for his soul? Moses in the Old Testament. These are just some principles that I want you to kind of keep in mind as we begin this discussion. Moses told us that the law that God gave was not for God's benefit. He doesn't need us anyway. Acts 17 said He doesn't need anything we have to offer. We need Him. He doesn't need us. The Lord commanded us to do all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God for our good always. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever had something to happen bad to you because you obeyed the will of God? On the other hand, have you ever had something bad to happen to you because you didn't? Give that some thought, and you understand what Moses was saying. Now, let's look at some modern examples of man ignoring moral truth. Man is selling the truth, and he's buying into something else. Now, when I mention some of these things, a lot of people get kind of upset because they don't like, I don't want to talk about it. Sometimes people say, well, you don't need to talk about things like that in the presence of children. Do your children watch the news? They do. They see it every day. They watch even the most common of TV programs. They see it every day. Go out into the public school and observe the lifestyles of the people that are there. They see it every day. So it's not anything new. Now, it may be offensive to some people. But the fact is, we have been sold a line that says that living together is the same as marriage, and it is not different, and there's nothing wrong with it. You can just live together and cohabitate, and it's fine. Doesn't make any difference. But God said this, therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 18 makes clear that God doesn't view them in exactly the same way, because the language there is very clear. Flee fornication. Every sin that a man doeth is without the body, but he that committeth fornication sinneth against his own body. Hebrews 13 and verse 4 is about as blunt as you can get. Marriage is honorable and all, the bed undefiled, but whoremongers and adulterers God will judge. Now that's a fact. Now people can say whatever they want to, but it's not the same. There's no way that it's exactly the same and that it's no different. But people have bought that. So nowadays we have all kinds of people anymore all over the place who never bother to marry. We used to have common law marriages. I'm not sure if they've taken that off the books, where if you lived together 7 years you were married. They might have changed that now because it's become so commonplace nobody really cares. But let me tell you something. If you think it's exactly the same and you have two people who move in together and buy them a house together and buy them a cars together and all that, you go try to separate and see what a mess you've got. You know, I used to listen to Dave Ramsey, and Dave Ramsey always gave this same advice. If you are living together and not married, do not buy a house because you're asking for a disaster. It's not the same. Even the law recognizes it's not the same. And the fact of the matter is that we try to pretend we have sold the truth. And we bought a lie. And what have we got out of it? Do you believe that our country is better because we have completely ignored the principle that marriage is the acceptable way of people cohabitating? Do you believe that our country is better because we've deserted that? Well, I tell you what, if you do, you just need to pay a little bit of attention to what's going on, and you would find that that simply is not true. We now have decided that man can define marriage. And it's kind of interesting. We had the Supreme Court of the United States to say that if you as a man want to marry a man, then you can do that. If you as a woman want to marry a woman, then you can do that. But let me tell you something. In Matthew chapter 19 and verse 6, when you see what Jesus said about who defines marriage, he said, what therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. God is the one who defines what marriage is. Now recently, it's kind of interesting to me during all this marriage discussion, people were making statements. People say, oh, you're just crazy. That's just nuts. There was a news story. You might have seen it. I can't remember the city. It was in the West, where a lady fell in love with the wall of the bus station, the train station. I don't remember which. And she married it. She married the wall in a bus station or a train station. Made national news. Now, you know, you say, well, that's ridiculous. It is no more ridiculous than a man marrying a man or a woman marrying a woman, period. Because once you remove the definition and you say man defines it, then you can define it any way you want. It doesn't make any difference. If we sell the truth, and that's what we've done, and we buy into a lie, and we decided that we can make all the definitions, then I'm telling you, we have a problem. Abortion. Abortion is something that has been around for many, many years, has been legal in our country since the 1970s. And people just talk like it's the greatest thing that ever was. That it is the defining difference between a person who's enlightened and a person who's not. And yet our laws are so tremendously inconsistent. We're being told that abortion is not the taking of a human life. Even though God inspired David to say, thou hast possessed my reins, thou hast covered me in my mother's womb, I will praise thee, I am fearfully and wonderfully made, marvelous are thy works. That my soul knoweth right well, my substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret, talking about conception and curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect, and in thy book all my members were written, which speaks really, addresses the subject of DNA, and the fact that a DNA of a child inside the mother's body is not the same DNA as the mother's, which in countenance a continuance was fashioned when as yet there was none of it. Now, I'm going to tell you what we need to realize. We need to understand that we have sold the truth, but we only half sold it. The world's only half sold the truth. They're still holding on to half of the truth. Half of it they sold, half of it they didn't. If a mother determines she wants to end a pregnancy at any point in time, period, she can do that, and that's fine. If a drunk driver hits a mother who is carrying a child, even if it's in the very early stages of conception and development, very early, then what is that drunk driver charged with? 2 accounts of vehicular homicide. One for the mother and one for the child that is not yet born. So we only sold half the truth. What that tells us is we know the truth, we just don't want to admit it. The truth is that is a child, and if we take the life of that child, that is in fact a murder. It's taking the life of an innocent child. And then we have the whole world filled with people that believe you can divorce for any reason you want to at all. Doesn't make any difference. I've described for you in the state of Tennessee, our lawmakers a few years ago got so tired of dealing with this issue about divorce, they finally just came up with this thing. And I don't know if it's still legal or not. I think it is. At the time that they came up with it, the 2 parties could just go down to the judge, give him a check or cash or a credit card, I guess, for $75. And for that $75, that judge could say, is there any of you making any kind of contentions or claims or you got any problem with property distribution? They say, no, we declare this a no-fault divorce. It's done. $75. Let me tell you what God said. God said in Matthew chapter 19, have you not read that he which made them beginning, made them male and female? Do you know what this was in answer to? The question, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? Jesus went on to say, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and they shall cleave to his wife, they shall twain shall be one flesh. Wherefore they're no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man put asunder. They say unto him, why did Moses then command to give a writing of divorcement, and to put her away? And he said unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your heart, suffered you to put away your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, shall marry another, committeth adultery, and whoso marrieth her which is put away doth commit adultery. We have a serious problem in our country that nobody chooses to admit because we've sold the truth and we bought a lie. And if you don't think it's a problem, I suggest you do something. If you know someone that's a public school teacher, ask them what is the biggest problem they have in school, and I think every one of them will tell you the truth. It's the family. And what's the number one problem with the family? Number one problem is that you don't know where they are, who they are, and you can't contact them. And the worst I ever saw, I went to a football game to senior night one night, and I saw a senior come out on the field, and there were 6 people introduced as his parents. 6. Now, that gets to be pretty confusing, doesn't it? You tell me that, oh, yeah, everything's fine. We've sold the truth. We bought a lie. We've decided we can now decide whether we're a man or woman. You know, as I said, we're about to have a new grandbaby. James and Lindsay have a new little girl. But they can't say it's a little girl, I guess. I mean, when they come in and they're filling out the birth certificate and it says male or female, I guess now you're going to have to write under there to be decided at age 18. When you get to be 18, you can decide what you are. I guess it's just horrible that we're going to say, this is a girl. But our country has come to such a point that now we say, oh, you can't tell somebody what the... I mean, we have a person who's arrested, sent to prison for treason, basically. And he gets out of prison, and now he's a woman. When he went in, he's a man. This is a confusing world, brother. We have sold the truth, and we bought a lie. Our DNA dictates what we are, period. We can like it or love it. That's the way it is. One of the things now that's come up is drugs. Alcohol has to be included in that because a lot of people don't realize it, but alcohol is a drug. It is a mind-altering drug. That's all it is. And we've decided in our country that we can use mind-altering drugs without consequence. Now, I want to read two things to you. I've got only one down, but I want to read something else and call your attention to something. In the book of Proverbs, chapter 23 and verse 31, God warns you about something. He said, look not upon the wine when it is red, when it giveth his color in the cup, when it moveth itself aright. At the last, it biteth like a serpent, stingeth like an adder. I wonder how many people in our country have had a drink or two and thought that's fine, and then been stopped by a policeman and given a ticket for driving under the influence and threw a fit about that because said, well, I didn't really do anything. They don't realize, and I'm going to tell you something that's a fact, and you need to know, but sometimes folks don't. If you get an ounce, which is basically a shot glass of just average whiskey, 70, 90%, somewhere in that range, usually around 70, 80 proof, which would be 35 to 40% alcohol. If you get a 6-ounce glass of wine, which is normally going to average somewhere around 12 or 13% of alcohol, or you get a 12-ounce can of beer, which is going to average around 8% alcohol, 6 to 8, if you examine all of those, a shot glass, a glass of wine, or a beer, they're exactly the same. There is no difference and no distinction between them. They have the same amount of alcohol in them by volume. So, a lot of people say, well, I don't drink whiskey, just drink a beer once in a while. But you're drinking exactly the same amount of alcohol, just more volume. That's it. And then people wonder why they get arrested for driving under the influence. Another thing people don't stop and consider either sometimes. Because of the different size of our body and metabolism. I mean, a person could drink one can of beer and if they tested him, he'd be in trouble. Just because of the size of your body and because of the metabolism of your body. You see, we've accepted this line that all these mind-altering drugs, they're fine. There's no problem with them. We have all kinds of laws now that we're trying to introduce. We even have a state and a town in that state in Pennsylvania that since their steel industry has gone away, now they've come up with the idea we're going to start a marijuana growing operation and we're going to just build up the employment in this city. Somebody said, oh, it's medical marijuana. Do you know what medical marijuana means? In California, they started out with the medical marijuana. And basically, they have a doctor. And generally speaking, he's not there. You call him. Call him on the phone and say, Doc, I have a headache. Okay, I'll prescribe you marijuana. Doc, I got an upset stomach. Okay, I'll prescribe you marijuana. It's a total sham, the whole thing. Now, in some cases, with cancer, etc., there may be some legitimate uses. But if that's true, then make it a prescription drug like everything else and create it and make it go to the drugstore with a real prescription from a real doctor and get it. That's a different story. I'm not talking about that. In the book of Galatians chapter 5, and there's something a lot of folks don't realize. A lot of people say, well, the Bible doesn't actually mention the drug use, but it actually does. When he talks in this particular case about drunkenness, and he talks about witchcraft, it's kind of interesting to me. You ought to look up the word witchcraft sometimes. You know what the word witchcraft is translated from? If I tell you the original language in the Greek language, you would recognize it pretty immediately as what he's really talking about. You know what the word is? It's pharmakeia. That ring a bell with you? You know what a pharmacy is? It's a place that dispenses drugs. You know that if you take witchcraft, generally speaking in the Old Testament, they would use a lot of drugs in it so that with mind-altering drugs, they get people to do what they want them to do. That's kind of normal in ancient times. And even if you look back to the American Indian, they practice the same thing. I mean, we need to understand that we can't just decide to sell the truth. I mean, the truth is, and I mean, without getting too graphic, if you've ever been around much alcohol, I saw an article one time said alcohol is a great remover. It'll remove stains from your clothes, the clothes from your children, the groceries from your table. It'll just remove everything. Think about it. You know, man has made these decisions. We're just going to do whatever we please. Now, here's what I want to talk about a little bit. What's the problem? Now, remember, I know I'm not, I guess, as they say, you're preaching to the choir. I understand most of you hopefully agree with what I'm saying. But you have children, you have grandchildren. You need to realize they're completely exposed to all these things constantly. Constantly. I mean, it's all around them all the time. And if you don't immunize them, nobody else will. The only place they're ever going to hear what we're talking about is in the Lord's church. Most denominational churches won't even talk about it anymore, the things we've been discussing. They just leave those alone. We won't mention sin. Just talk about all this positive character building. And we come down and we think and we say, oh, I just don't want to say that. But if you don't, who will? So what's the problem? Well, the problem is that man chooses to ignore what is obviously true. I mean, there are things that are obviously true, but people just ignore it. Think back to the idea of the drunk driver. Drunk driver hits a lady who's pregnant. Maybe she's 6 weeks pregnant. The lady is killed, and maybe she didn't even know she was pregnant, but they did an autopsy, found that she was, and they charged him with 2 vehicular homicides. Now what that means is we know enough. We know enough to be able to recognize the truth. We just don't want to. So Jesus went back to Isaiah and he said this. Here's the problem. Hearing ye shall hear and shall not understand. Seeing ye shall see and shall not perceive. For this people's heart is waxed gross, their ears are dull of hearing, their eyes they have closed, lest at any time they should see with their eyes, hear with their ears, should understand with their heart, should be converted, and I should heal them. Now that's a big problem. We've got to sensitize people a little bit so they'll be able to recognize the truth so that they don't sell it. We think that we're wise enough to reverse what is true. Let me tell you something. And I know that in saying this, there are a lot of people get all tore up. The Supreme Court of the United States does not determine what the truth is. They don't. Now, they can determine what is constitutional and what's unconstitutional, but remember, man wrote that, so that really doesn't deal with the question of the truth. When you go back to Isaiah chapter 5, you sometimes have a problem that people want to change things around. He said, in this particular passage, I'm reading chapter 5 and verse 20, woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, put darkness for light, light for darkness, put bitter for sweet, and sweet for bitter. Woe unto them that are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight. The reason they change good to evil and evil to good and darkness to light and light to darkness, bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter is because they are so eat up with their own self-worth and their own ego that they make decisions and say, oh, we can decide. We know better. I want to ask you a question. I want you to think about it. If you've been around a few years, do you think with all the decisions such as this that our country is getting better and better and better and better? If you do, you better take a look at the news and pay attention to what's going on, because it's not. I mean, I'm just saying that Christians can be swept up in it. You know, our children have been fed such a bill of goods, and they sometimes swallow it. The reason they do is we're not strong enough in saying to them, look, that's just not true. And I'm not willing to sell the truth. There's nothing to replace it. We don't realize that human wisdom cannot provide the answers. Somehow we believe that man is going to answer all the questions that we have. Well, man can't answer much of any question at all when he gets right down to it without the assistance of God if you're dealing with the moral realm. Now, he might answer questions about science, but even then he's often wrong. But in Isaiah chapter 55 and verse 8 and 9, I mean, you have another passage that Isaiah speaks, and he said this, my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither your ways my ways, saith the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. So why are we going to turn around and say, oh, we as human beings, we can make all these decisions. We just need to ignore all these principles and let people just do whatever they please, and it doesn't make any difference. Well, I agree from the standpoint of, okay, I don't think we can pass laws to control human behavior because it really doesn't control it. But if we begin to force people, I tell you, I was really a little encouraged, and I don't know if you paid any attention this week, but we did have a court ruling that basically said a business does not have to do something that violates the conscience of the business owner. That's a great thing. Because before you had to. You were required to do things that you believe were wrong. So at least we're being given an option, an opportunity. And humans are beginning to say, well, you know, we don't know everything, and maybe we're wrong in this, and so we'll let people disagree with us if they please. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 19, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, will bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent. Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this world? Hath not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? Now, I want to give you one last little point. Here's the problem. We choose to ignore the lessons from history. If you go back to the Old Testament and you discover why the people of Israel were destroyed and rejected as God's people, do you know why? Well, there were some things mentioned about idolatry. But the problem with idolatry in that period of time was that they were worshiping gods and goddesses that were really sexual oriented, of fertility, and they had all kinds of immorality associated with it. I mean, if you don't believe that, you go back to the time that Balaam advised Balak that if he just get them involved in this idolatry, they commit fornication, God destroy them. He did. You also stop and think about it. One of the things he mentioned was the shedding of innocent blood. Is there more innocent than an unborn child? If you look back in history to the Roman Empire and you read the rise and the fall of the Roman Empire, do you know what led to the destruction of the Roman Empire? Immorality. They became so immoral they just consumed themselves. God reminds you of that in Hebrews chapter 3 because He talks about something you can see a little bit clearer because it's right before your eyes. Wherefore, as the Holy Ghost saith, the day, if you will hear His voice, harden not your hearts as in the provocation of the day of temptation in the wilderness, when your fathers tempted me, proved me, saw my works 40 years. Wherefore I was grieved with that generation and said, they do always err in their heart, and they have not known my ways. So I swear in my wrath, they shall not enter into my rest. Take heed, brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God. Let me ask you a question. Do you know why? Do you know how many? When the people of Israel came out of Egyptian bondage, there were 600 and something thousand fighting men, I believe, if I remember correctly. I believe that's correct. There was thought to be around 2 million people. But 600, 700,000 of them were above the age of 20. I want to ask you a question. Do you know how many of those people who came out of Egyptian bondage, headed to the Promised Land, actually entered it, who were above the age of 20, able to make decisions for themselves? Do you know how many? 2, wasn't it? There were 2. Joshua and Caleb. That was it. Nobody else entered that land. Well, now, why do you think that's significant? Why does He call that to your attention? God says, you know what? You need to pay some attention to the fact that if you ignore the principles of my word and you sell the truth and you buy something to replace it, you're going to destroy yourself. Now, somebody says, well, that's a political sermon. I'm not really preaching in a political context. I'm not in any way suggesting that our country is going to wake up as a whole and our Congress is going to pass laws that will actually return us. I don't have any such supposition. But I do know that we live in this world. And as older people, hopefully we have the strength and the stamina to withstand it. But we have young people, some not yet born, they're going to be raised up. Somebody has got to tell them the difference between the truth and a lie. And if they don't, they're going to lose their soul. And that's a serious proposition. Hopefully the lesson's been somewhat beneficial. I've started out the lesson trying to figure out a way to present it. I don't know if I presented it very well or not, but had several different ways I was going to go, and this is the way I ended up with. And I hope that each one of you can say, okay, just take it the way it's given. Let me tell you something. The Apostle Paul, if you read the New Testament, You've got 1 Corinthians 6, Galatians 5, Colossians chapter 4, and several other passages in which there's just a whole list of sins that we need to avoid. Well, why do you think he's saying that? He's trying to immunize you to it because the whole world's full of it. And if you don't, you're going to have a problem. We're going to sing a song of encouragement. There's power in the blood. One thing to remember is this, that whatever we do, and however much we try to avoid temptation, all have sinned and come short of the glory of God and have need of having their sins removed, that they might be pure and clean in the sight of God once more. This world has a tremendous impact upon us, and all of us stumble and fall at some point. On the day of Pentecost, those people had just 50 days before that day had actually murdered the Son of God. And they were told to repent and be baptized for remission of sins. If they could find forgiveness, so can we. So think about it as we stand and as we sing the song.